Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking into something we all use every single day, but probably don't think about a lot. The US dollar.
It's more interesting than you might think.
Oh, I'm sure. Like I said, I don't think about it much. All I know is it buys stuff, and that's pretty much it.
Well, you've come to the right place.
To help us understand the dollar better, we have a true expert with us today. You're a numismatist, right?
Yes, that's right.
I had to look that up.
It's not a word you hear every day. It just means someone who studies coins and money. A fancy way of saying money nerd, I guess.
I'm ready to nerd out.
Great.
So let's start at the beginning. I know the US dollar's been around for a while, but just how far back does its history go?
Well, the dollar as we know it was officially established in 1792, but its roots actually go back even further.
Really?
Oh, yeah. The story of the US dollar is really intertwined with the Spanish silver dollar. The
Whoa.
Spanish silver dollar is sometimes called pieces of eight.
Pieces of...
You've heard of them?
Yeah, like from pirate movies and stuff. I always thought that was made up.
Nope, it was a real thing. These Spanish silver dollars were used all over the world for trade, and their influence reached the early American colonies.
So that's where we get the dollar from.
Not directly, but they definitely had a big impact.
It's pretty cool how these historical connections pop up in unexpected places.
Absolutely. Even the term 2 bits for a quarter comes from those Spanish dollars.
Really?
Yep, the Spanish dollar was divided into 8 reales, and a quarter dollar back in the day was worth 2 of those reales, hence 2 bits.
That's so interesting. I never knew that.
Even the dollar sign, the symbol, is thought to have come from the Spanish symbol for pieces of 8.
Wow. Okay, so we started with a connection to silver, but I know gold also played a big role in the dollar story.
You're right. Gold is a huge part of the picture. Early on, the U.S. actually adopted a bimetallic standard, meaning the dollar was linked to both silver and gold. They wanted to be flexible, but it wasn't always smooth sailing. We'll take the California gold rush, for example. It flooded the market with gold.
Yeah, making gold less valuable, I'm guessing.
Exactly. And that messed with the balance between silver and gold.
Oh, so people started hoarding silver coins.
Exactly. They were worth more as metal than as currency.
I can see how that would be a problem. So did the government try to fix it?
They did. They tried to adjust things with the Coinage Act of 1853. Basically reduced the silver content in some coins to try to keep them circulating.
Did that work?
Not really. Bimetallic standard was always a bit shaky. Eventually, they went all in on gold in the late 19th century.
Ah, the gold standard. I've heard of that. All those shiny gold coins in old westerns.
Yeah.
What kind of gold coins were there back then?
You had your familiar $5 half eagles and $10 eagles, of course, but also some more unusual denominations. $3 gold coins, even a short-lived $2.50 quarter eagle.
I bet those are worth a fortune now.
Oh, yeah. They're collector's items for sure.
But we don't use the gold standard anymore, right? When did that end?
It was a gradual process, but it all culminated in what's known as the Nixon shock in 1971.
The Nixon shock. Sounds dramatic.
It was. The U.S. was facing some tough economic times. Inflation was rising and gold reserves were shrinking.
So Nixon decided to abandon the gold standard.
Basically, yes. He announced that the dollar would no longer be directly convertible to gold.
Wow. So that's when the US dollar became what we call fiat currency.
Exactly. And that shift changed the whole game in global finance.
I think I get the basics, but remind me again, what exactly does fiat currency mean?
It means that the dollar's value isn't tied to a physical commodity like gold anymore. It's backed by the government's promise. It's based on trust.
So the value of our money is basically based on faith in the government. That's kind of wild when you think about it.
It is, but it's the system we have now, and most currencies around the world work this way.
So even though we moved away from gold, the dollar is still printed on paper, right?
Yeah.
What's the story behind the bills we use today?
Those bills are officially called Federal Reserve notes. They've evolved over time, too, you know?
No, they haven't always looked the same.
Nope. Before 1928, they were actually a lot bigger. People called them horse blankets because they were so large.
Horse blankets? Seriously?
Oh, yeah, they were massive.
Why'd they change the size?
Well, for one, practicality.
Makes sense. Imagine stuffing a horse blanket in your wallet.
Right. But security was a factor too smaller size, made it harder to counterfeit.
Interesting. So the dollar bills we use today, is there a reason they don't make the really big denominations anymore? Like the $500 or $10,000 bills?
Those were real, you know?
I kind of figured they were, but I've never seen one in person.
Yeah, they were mostly used for big transactions back in the day, but they got discontinued in the late 1960s.
Why'd they stop making them?
Concerns about illegal activities, mostly.
Oh, I could see how that would be a problem.
They were just too easy to use for things you wouldn't want to use them for.
Makes sense. So one last question that's always bugged me. Why do we still have the $1 bill when we have the dollar coin?
A classic conundrum.
Seems kind of redundant, right?
Well, part of it is habit. People are just used to the dollar bill. And then there's the paper industry. They have a vested interest in keeping paper money around.
The power of lobbying. So even a simple $1 bill has a whole story behind it. Starting to realize there's way more to the dollar than I ever imagined.
We've only just scratched the surface.
This has been so interesting. But I know we have a lot more to cover, especially the dollar's global impact.
That's next on the agenda, the dollar's rise to world currency status.
Can't wait. We'll take a quick break and be back soon to dive into that fascinating chapter. All right, we're back and ready to tackle the dollar's global story.
It's a big one.
We talked about the dollar's origins, its link to gold, and the shift to fiat currency. But how did it become a world currency?
Well, it's a journey that's closely tied to major global events, especially World War I.
World War I, how so?
The U.S. came out of the war in a really strong economic position while Europe was, well, devastated.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Plus, the U.S. had a lot of gold reserves at that time, so the dollar started gaining traction internationally.
So other countries basically started treating the dollar like gold.
In a way, yeah. It was a gradual process, of course, but the dollar was seen as stable and reliable.
And then after World War II, there was that Bretton Woods agreement, right?
Exactly. Bretton Woods was a game changer. It officially established the dollar as the world's primary reserve currency.
Okay, I remember learning about Bretton Woods in school, but it was a while ago. Can you break it down for me and for our listeners who might not be familiar with it?
Sure. Imagine a rule book for the entire global financial system. That's basically what Bretton Woods created.
A rule book, huh?
Yep. It pegged other major currencies to the US dollar, which in turn was directly linked to gold at a fixed rate.
So the dollar was like the anchor for everything else.
Pretty much. It was all designed to stabilize exchange rates and encourage international trade after the war.
So the dollar became super important. Central banks all over the world started hoarding dollars.
Huge stockpiles of them. And even after the dollar's link to gold was broken in 1971, it remained the top dog globally.
It's pretty incredible that it held on to that position even after Nixon took us off the gold standard.
Right. The dollar was just too deeply entrenched by then.
What are the main reasons for the dollar's continued global dominance?
Well, a few things first. The U.S. economy is massive and relatively stable. That breeds confidence.
Yeah, it's hard to compete with that.
Then you have the U.S. financial markets. They're deep and liquid, meaning it's easy to buy and sell dollar-denominated assets like U.S. Treasury bonds.
So it's not just about the dollar itself, but the whole financial system around it.
Exactly. And those U.S. Treasury bonds, they're considered super safe investments, so there's always demand for dollars to buy them.
And there's just the sheer force of habit, right? Everyone's used to using dollars for trade.
You got it. Changing that would be a huge undertaking.
So everyone's playing by the dollar's rules.
A perfect analogy. And speaking of how widespread the dollar is, did you know that about 80% of all $100 bills are actually circulating outside the U.S.?
80%.
Seriously.
It's true. So those Benjamins in our wallets are part of a much bigger global story.
Mind-blowing. Okay, so we've got physical dollars all over the world, but you also mentioned something called euro dollars earlier. What are those exactly?
Euro dollars. Simply put, they're U.S. dollars held in banks outside the United States.
So like dollars on vacation.
Sort of.
Yeah.
They operate in a parallel system, often outside the direct control of U.S. regulators.
Yeah, a jungle out there. Okay, so all this global dominance, what does it actually mean for the U.S.? Is it all good, or are there downsides too?
It's definitely a mixed bag, kind of a double-edged sword.
Oh, so.
On one hand, it gives the U.S. government some serious borrowing power. We can borrow a lot of money at low interest rates, even when we're running deficits.
That's because everyone wants dollars.
Exactly. Economists call it exorbitant privilege.
Exorbitant privilege, huh? Sounds pretty sweet. But there's got to be a catch. There is. A strong dollar makes U.S. exports more expensive, which can hurt American companies trying to sell their products overseas.
So it can backfire on us.
It can. Plus, it can lead to trade imbalances and tension with other countries. Not to mention that some economists worry that relying on this privilege could make the U.S. economy more vulnerable in the long run.
Makes you think. What about the impact on other countries? Does the dollar's dominance affect them?
It really depends. For some countries, pegging their currency to the dollar offers stability and can attract foreign investment.
Sounds good.
But it also means they're at the mercy of U.S. monetary policy, which might not always be in their best interest.
So they give up some control for the sake of stability.
Right, and that stability can evaporate quickly if there's a global crisis.
It's all interconnected. I'm starting to see just how complex this all is. So much riding on the U.S. dollar. But what about the future? With all these digital currencies popping up, is the dollar's reign coming to an end?
That's the million-dollar question, literally. And we'll tackle that head-on in the final part of our deep dive.
Ooh, cliffhanger. Can't wait to hear what you have to say about that. We're back for the final part of our deep dive into the U.S. dollar. We've covered a lot of ground from its humble beginnings to its rise as the world's leading reserve currency.
A truly fascinating journey.
But now the big question, what's next for the dollar? With digital currencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum gaining traction, is the dollar's reign in jeopardy?
It's the question everyone's asking, and to be honest, it's hard to say for sure. The dollar has been a cornerstone of the global financial system for so long.
It's hard to imagine things changing drastically.
You're right, it's deeply entrenched. It's the go-to currency for international trade, it's what central banks hold in reserve, and it's a safe haven for investors during times of turmoil.
But these digital currencies seem to offer some real advantages: faster transactions, lower fees, and even increased transparency.
They do have the potential to disrupt the system for sure, and for some countries, especially those looking to reduce their dependence on the U.S., they might seem like an attractive alternative.
So could we see a future where, say, the Chinese yuan or some kind of digital currency basket replaces the dollar as the world's reserve currency?
It's not impossible. China's been pushing for greater use of the yuan in global trade, and the rise of central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, could speed up that shift.
So the dollar's dominance isn't guaranteed.
Exactly. But any change is likely to be gradual and complex. It won't happen overnight.
It sounds like we're headed into uncharted territory. What factors will determine the dollar's fate going forward?
Well, the health of the U.S. economy is obviously crucial. If the U.S. remains strong, the dollar will likely retain its safe haven status. But if things go south, people might lose faith.
So a strong economy is essential.
Absolutely. But the U.S. also needs to stay ahead of the game when it comes to financial technology. If other countries develop more advanced payment systems, the dollar could lose its edge.
It's a global race to innovate.
For sure. And of course, geopolitics plays a huge role. We've all seen how global events can shake up financial markets.
So stability is key.
Big time. Wars, major power shifts. Those kinds of things could definitely weaken the dollar's position.
It's all connected. The dollar's fate is tied to the U.S.'s role in the world.
Without a doubt. And finally, there's the element of trust. The dollar's value rests on the belief that the U.S. government will manage its finances responsibly. If that trust erodes, the dollar could be in trouble.
It's a delicate balance. So much to consider. What does all this mean for everyday people like us? Should we be worried?
Well, for the foreseeable future, the dollar will probably still be a central part of our lives.
That's reassuring.
But it's always good to stay informed. The world of money is changing rapidly, and even the mighty dollar will have to adapt.
So we need to be prepared for a future where the dollar might not be the only option.
Exactly. The future is uncertain, but one thing's for sure. The dollar's story isn't over yet. It will continue to evolve, face new challenges, and maybe even reinvent itself.
Well, this has been an incredible journey through the history and future of the U.S. dollar. I know I've learned a ton. Thanks for sharing your expertise with us and with our listeners.
My pleasure. It's been a fascinating conversation. The dollar story is a reminder that even something as familiar as money is constantly evolving and full of surprises.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of the U.S. dollar. We hope you've enjoyed the journey and learned something new along the way. Until next time, keep exploring and keep those questions coming.